Joshua chapter number 3 is where we're at. And if anybody has any questions about the subject matter we were talking about last class, we can certainly bring that up. You had a whole week to think about it, and I can let you go ahead and start with it. But if not, chapter number 3. Let's read the first 4 verses, shall we? It says, Then Joshua rose early in the morning. Now remember, they're about to, let me just stop. What are they about to do? Do you have any idea where we are even at in Joshua anymore? What's about to happen? What's that? So we just came out of the story of Rahab conversing with the spies. All Israel is planning to do what? All right, go over the Jordan. Okay. So the spies have come back from Jericho and said, hey, this is good, let's do it. Chapter 3, verse 1. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Acacia Grove, and came to the Jordan. He and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. So it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it. Don't come near the ark, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before. Okay. So, let's see. Okay. So it's early in the morning. Good things happen when you wake up early in the morning, isn't that right, Asher? So they're waking up early, ready to get things done. Joshua's ready to get things done. You can imagine the anticipation that Joshua has, or maybe even the nervousness. I don't know. He's still a human being. The people had traveled about 6 miles or so from this grove of acacia trees to close to the Jordan. It's about 6 miles. So they get to the Jordan, and they need to make some preparations before they go over into this land of people who are not like them and do not like them and obviously don't want their land taken away from them. But it was going to happen anyways. And so the priests were commanded. So the priests were going to lead the way to a little closer to the Jordan, and then through the Jordan and onto the other side to a place they're going to camp at. They're eventually going to call it Gilgal. But some preparations had to be made. The priest's going to take the ark, going to carry the ark, and people were staying about 2,000 cubits behind. Now that's about 3,000 feet, which is about a half a mile away. So that's pretty long ways. So the ark was supposed to go way out there, you know. Around here, you wouldn't be able to see the ark because I guess, can you even see straight half a mile around here anywhere? I don't know. Maybe not many places. There's just hills everywhere. But I guess going up to the Jordan, you're going to have a big, nice, flat area, a little flatter area at least. And so they were going to see the ark way out there and stay half a mile or so behind it. I thought that was interesting, and I was trying to think why they did that. In the end of verse 4, it says, so you're going to stay behind this, this far, so that you can know which way to go, because you guys have never you haven't even gone this way before. So I imagine, I still don't even know if that makes sense to me. I mean, how hard is it to spot out a river half a mile ahead and just go towards the river, you know. Maybe God wanted them to go a very specific way, cross at a very specific spot, which is probably likely. And it might be that they needed to stay so far back so that they could witness the miracle. Remember, you're talking about how many people were crossing over this? How many people do you think were crossing over?
Over 1,000.
4,000?
I would say. Roughly.
How many people is a little higher than that?
Wow.
I mean, we're talking about all of Israel now. All of Israel. This is the whole, all the people.
2 or 3 million.
Yeah, we're talking about 2 or 3 million people crossing over this thing, which is insane to even think. I can't even picture that. I don't know if I've ever seen 1 million people together. The biggest crowd I've probably seen is what have you seen? Maybe like a 110, 120 in a big stadium, football stadium from above, you know, and you're like, whoa, that's a lot of people. Maybe at some parades or some marches that they've had in DC, maybe you get a bunch of people in there, right? You can see it from above. And man, that's a lot of people, just a sea of heads, you know. We're talking about 2 or 3 million people having to cross, and so they're having to stay behind. So I guess it would make it easier for everybody to see if it's that far ahead, right? No, I'm just trying to picture this in my head, and so that they can not only because we all know what's going to happen, right? What's about to happen? How are they going to cross over?
The waters are going to dry.
Okay, so the waters are going to dry up, basically. And so maybe it is the case that God wanted them, they need to be able to see this. God wanted them to see that the whole picture better. And of course, God, the Ark of the Covenant is representing God leading the way. That's the idea, right? God's going to lead. God's going to do all of this for you. All you guys have to do is follow behind. Yes, ma'am.
And these people hadn't seen the parting of the Red Sea.
Most of these, I would say some of them have. I would say of the men, I'd say almost, I would say a good third, at least a third or a half of the men have actually are a new generation that were born in the wilderness after the Red Sea, right? And so what miracles did they see? Not the big ones like the Red Sea parting. They would have had the manna falling. They would have, okay, water from the rock, which I don't even, okay, so that's how they drank. So everyone had a pillar of cloud, the pillar of fire, you know, by night and stuff like that. As far as the Red Sea goes, only half, I would say a good, probably over half of them hadn't seen something like that. So anyways, I think it was being so far back from the ark, let them know that God was leading, also that they could get a better sense to clearly see what God was going to do to the Jordan River. Okay. All right, 5 and 6 says, Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. He's talking about, he's going to dry up the river. And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the Ark of the Covenant and cross over before the people. So they took the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. All right. I really just want to talk about verse number 5 here. Verse 5, this idea of the people sanctifying themselves so that they can be prepared for God to do great things for them. Now, that's a lesson that can be carried all the way over to the New Testament, all the way over to our day, right? So they were to sanctify themselves. Now, the way they did it was, what does that even mean? So when you read that they were to sanctify themselves, what do you think? And I'm not asking for a perfect thing. I mean, what do you think that involved? What's that?
Preparing for.
Yeah, so how would they prepare?
The right mindset.
Prayers, getting in the right mindset. Think of the old law. Just think of the old law and everything that you've learned from Hebrews. Huh? Don't you think it would involve of like outward, like cleansing of themselves, washing their clothes kind of stuff? Like making sure that they're actually clean and, you know, clear from impurities and things like that. A lot of that would have been an outward, so we're talking about an outwardly sanctification kind of thing. So remember, the priests had all these laws about sanctifying themselves. They couldn't go in the temple before they washed and stuff like that, right? Now, I think doing this, these outwardly ritual type stuff, which God commanded, would have helped prepare their minds, get them in the right mindset. Prayer would have obviously been a part of it as well. So preparing them putting their full faith and trust in God that this something crazy was about to happen. I don't know what they might have thought was going to happen. It also just says, hey, God's going to do wonders before you. Now today, aren't we supposed to be sanctified? Are we to sanctify ourselves? Okay, so we're sanctified by Jesus Christ, by his sacrifice through the washing of the blood, right? John 17:17. Oh, let me flip over here. Oh, look at that. Look at that. I had 2, 1, 2, 4. So the sanctifying of ourselves involves our obedience. Would you agree with that? Is it right to say that we sanctify ourselves, and then God sanctifies us? Is it just one or the other, or both of those can be true?
Combination of both of them.
You think it's a combination of both?
Yeah.
You don't think it's a combination of both? Okay. I think that's right. So you have John 17:17, where Jesus is praying to God, and he asks God, sanctify them by what?
Truth, thy word is truth.
Sanctify them by your truth. So who does the sanctification according to Jesus there? God. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. So how does God do that then? How does he sanctify them by truth? How's he going to sanctify? How are you sanctified by truth? And then he says your word is truth. So how are you sanctified by God's word? Right? That's the same thing. Hearing it, learning it, obeying it. So we get the sense, but it's the God that actually does the sanctification. We're just doing what God asks us to do, right? So that's how you can see where there's God's involved in our sanctification. Matter of fact, you can find verses where God the Father sanctifies us. We're sanctified by the blood of Jesus Christ. That's in Hebrews 10, I think. And then we're sanctified by the Holy Spirit as well. So all of the Godhead is involved in our sanctification. But all of that has to harmonize with what Jesus said in John 17:17, which God sanctifies us by his truth, which is his word, which has to involve, we're just trying to think with our common sense here, right? It has to involve us, our obedience to that word, right? And then you have Ephesians 5, verse 26 says, that Paul says that he might sanctify her. He's talking about the church. That he might sanctify her by the washing of, sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word. Yeah, all that put together there, which washing of water cannot possibly mean anything other than water baptism, but it's by the word as well, which involves our obedience. And so it all comes together perfectly, and it makes really good sense. So that's a good lesson for us today. We need to make sure that we are sanctified before God's going to bring us into the promised land, right? You get the picture? You get the lesson? Easy. Now, only the Levites could carry the ark, and not every Levite. If you just happen to be born a Levite, you couldn't just walk up and be carrying the ark. Well, that's not the way it worked. There was a certain family of Levites that carried the ark. They were called the Kohathites. So you can look at Numbers chapter 4 to read about that, if you are so inclined to do so. Remember, all priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. And then even then, the priests were kind of split up into their different duties, and only certain families of the priests could do certain things. All right, 7 and 8 says, and the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you, or I'm going to make you great in the sight of all Israel, that the people may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. You shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. So here, okay, so God's speaking to Joshua now. If anybody doubted Joshua's leadership yet, if they were those kind of people were still around, like, I don't know. I mean, Joshua's great. He's not really. I mean, he's no Moses. Well, God's going to seek to remove all of that doubt and really exalt Joshua in the eyes of the people, which he needed to be. If God wanted that to happen, then that's a proper thing. And it's going to be similar to what God's miracles did for Moses in the eyes of the people, right? Exodus 14, verse 31. There's the Ark of the Covenant, by the way. See that? If you didn't know, remember that picture? Some of y'all might remember that. Looked at that. That's what it looked like anyways. Now, some might say the poles were on the top or whatever, but it doesn't really matter. Overlaid, it's acacia wood overlaid with gold. I would imagine it's a pretty heavy piece of furniture there. But anyways, and I suppose it only took four men, maybe two on each end, two, so maybe 8, right? I don't know actually how many guys it took. Would have been heavy. And y'all remember what was inside of there, right?
Aaron's rod that budded.
Aaron's rod that budded,
10 Commandments.
and the stone tablets, and
Yeah,
a pot of the manna that they had been eating, right? Okay. Exodus 14:31. Let me go back to how the miracles that Moses was doing did for him. It says, Israel, well, the plagues too, the 10 plagues. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. Yeah, they were great. And so the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So there shouldn't have been any question about Moses's side by God after them. Remember, Moses was doing some of the miracles as well, right? Throwing the staff down. Remember, Moses had one of the miracles he did was he could make his hand, right? His hand withered, and then it'd be just fine. Don't know if exactly he was tucking it in his suit pocket there, but all right. Now let's read 9 through 13. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, "Come here and hear the words of the Lord your God." And Joshua said, "By this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Hivites, and the Perizzites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man from every tribe." And that's kind of just thrown in there real quick. We're gonna learn why they did that in the next chapter. So, all right, so the ark's about to go. Before that happens, you guys need to choose 12 people. And then verse 13, "It shall come to pass as soon as the soles of the feet," so they didn't go, they weren't just wading all the way in. I mean, as soon as they just went in on the riverbed, or the side of it. As soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off. The waters that come down from upstream, they shall stand as a heap. So it was when the people set out from their camp. Let me stop there. So God addresses Joshua. Then now here in our passage, Joshua addresses the people. And Joshua predicts this miracle, right? So obviously, when a man predicts a miracle and it happens, that's a bona fide, that's a legitimate prophet of God, right? When he says, "Hey, this is going to happen, and it's going to happen this way," and then when it actually happens, the people step back and go, "Okay, this guy's legit," right? Right? All right, so that's part of it. I mean, and that should be a principle that carries over today. When someone predicts something and it doesn't happen, we should say, "Yeah, that guy is a phony. He's a fake." For some reason, that doesn't happen. I don't know why. My neighbor tells me that. I think I invited her to church one time, and she says, Benny Hinn is my preacher. If y'all know who Benny Hinn is, I wouldn't have him as my preacher. Yeah, well, don't worry about it. He's nobody. Anyways, Fakest, he's awful. The man is awful as far as what he teaches. And I'm not really, I mean, maybe he's got a good heart, but it's men like him who predict all of these things and none of it ever come true. And he's such a fake with his, taking his coat off and waving it over people. Have y'all seen those videos? If you haven't seen it, you gotta look them up. You're gonna just laugh because it's unbelievably, it's so crazy. And people just, falling out. Oh man, you're talking about it's emotionalism on steroids is what that kind of stuff is. But anyways, he's made all these dumb sayings and predictions and they don't come true. And people just like blind, they just like, take my money, you false prophet. It's unbelievable. Of course, he's not alone. I don't mean to be picking on him just because there's a bunch of them out there, but I don't understand why we can continue to follow after people like that, or why people do.
I think it's hard to believe that people back in Christ's days, after seeing all those miracles performed, that they
Still wouldn't.
I mean, today we don't see those miracles, but yet we believe it. And those people saw the miracles
and they didn't.
Some of them didn't.
Yeah. Isn't that something? Yeah, it is crazy, isn't it? We human beings, we're weird. We are messed up. We are weird people.
I initially thought you said Benny Hill.
Benny Hill, I don't know who was that.
The comedian.
I don't
He
know.
was a comedian back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. That's who I originally thought you said.
No, Benny Hill.
Benny Hill, wow.
No. I guess everybody here knows who Benny Hill is, huh? Okay.
The older people.
Oh, I wasn't gonna say that, but you represent it. You sure do, buddy.
Chuck, this event is so important that it's mentioned twice in this chapter.
That is a good point. Yep. He basically, I think he repeats this, or he does it in chapter 4 as well. But yeah, you're right. And
that
this
would be the third time then.
So the writer, the historian who is writing this, it's a big deal when you see, for us reading it through the Bible, we're like, man, we're like, we got this whole Bible to read. We're trying to read this in a month. We're trying to read this in a year. And here we are repeating things. I just read this. You gotta stop. Don't do that. Don't do that. And just understand the writer's perspective. Like, this was extremely important. And when you see things repeated like that, it's not just because somebody messed up somewhere and transcribing and they're repeating the same. It's there for a reason, and it's absolutely because of its importance. But I want you to notice this, that this miracle was not a parting of the Jordan River. He didn't part the river, right? Because what did we just read?
He stopped the flow.
So he kind of dams up the river at a spot. And then the river would have just dried up. So it's not an actual parting. The Red Sea seemed to be parted. This miracle here was just a damming up. It says stand as a heap, and the water's going to stand up as a heap. And so that the Hebrew there, it means just to pile up like a mound. And so, I mean, you're probably picturing it as I am, where the water is just going to pile up, keep higher and higher and higher at some point in the river. It's just going to stop, which is interesting. It's so kind of blows my mind to think what that would look like if I were able to see it. And actually, when you read where the Red Sea parted, it says they stood like a heap, stood up like a heap, and it actually says the depths of the sea congealed. Now, what does that mean? So yeah, sort of, yeah, thicken up, and it's more like a jelly or something, Jello, right? So So that's in the heart of the sea, the depths congealed, they thickened. And so they would have stood up in a big old heap. Yeah, it's wild to think about. Anyways, that's the wording. Any comments before we finish? All right, 14 through 17. It says, so it was, verse 14, when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan, the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as those who bore the Ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the Ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of harvest. Verse 16, that the waters which came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaratan. So the waters that went down into the sea of the Araba, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. And the people who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the ground of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. Okay. Now, at times, like if we went to the Jordan River and went to visit the Jordan River, has anybody ever been over there? I think maybe I've asked this before. Is anybody going over there? And can I go with you? So at times, the Jordan could be, well, we wouldn't want to go now, but the Jordan could be easily waded through. So if we went over there at a certain time when it wasn't harvest time or whatever, when the Jordan was not at flood stage, you could probably just go through it. At least at certain points of the river, right? And it's kind of a nasty river, from what I understand, kind of muddy. But anyway, but at flood stage, I mean, you're talking, you have to be like, pretty good swimmer to get across it at flood stage. And so that's the kind of river we're dealing with now. It's impassable, really, for probably 98% of the people. And so that would have made the miracle even that more impressive, right? Dam up a little stream, well, big deal, I can do that, throw some rocks, whatever. But if you dam up a river that's at its flood stage, which you cannot cross over, then, well, okay, a little more, it takes a little more power, right? You get the picture? And I think this fact also, the fact that it's flooded at this time, also shuts down attempts to explain the miracle by natural means, which whoever out there they love to do, right? I think I remember seeing people, our beloved History Channel or whatever it is, National Geographic, they try to explain the 10 plagues by natural means. Have you ever seen that kind of stuff? You ever seen that before?
Yeah, a short time, and then I turned it.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And so people out there are like, well, this could have happened by, let's say, so actually I'll get you a second, Paul. There's actually, from what I understand, way on up, I'm talking miles up, near the city of Adam. Now, the city of Adam would have been, let me see, you're talking about 15 to 18 miles away from the spot that they were. So you can't see that. I mean, way on up there, up the river, this thing dammed up, or congealed up, or piled up as a heap. Now, apparently, from what I understand, they're up that way, between this Zaratan and Adam, is like where the elevation goes up, and so you're looking at it's part of the Jordan that's got some higher elevation on the sides of it, like cliffs, and the Jordan gets a lot narrower. And some people say, well, they just happen to be at the river at the right time when a mudslide came and dammed up that little tiny part, and it caused the river to just completely dry up, which that doesn't, I mean, has that ever happened? Like, do we ever have that on record? That damming up a whole river, something like the Jordan? But let's say, do you think God could have chosen that method to dam the river up? Could God have caused this humongous rock to just fall and dam the river up if that's what he wanted to do? So wouldn't that still have been a miracle?
He could have moved the mountains together to.
Hey, I mean, he could have done a number of things, yeah. So, or an earthquake, yeah, earthquake causing the rock slide, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But if God did it that way, it's still a miracle, which I don't really think he did it that way. It doesn't matter. Yes, sir.
That was before that was going away.
Now, so what now? Say that again?
The water stopped, but nobody could see what was holding.
Right, that's a long ways up there.
And it stayed there
15
a
miles.
long time for all those people to get through.
Yeah, right, yeah. A lot of people.
Can you imagine though, I mean, go to Los Angeles or New York during rush hour on one interstate. And can you imagine,
Because that's not that.
the pace wouldn't be really, really fast because there's so many people and we're not their animals with them.
Yeah, they would have all kinds of.
See, they had so much, it could have took a day or more for all of them to cross that.
I would say at least, probably at most, I would say at most only a day. So the priests had to make the first move, right? They step in, the water stops. And you have to think about the faith of the priests. Remember, they're only human. You're stepping into a flooded river holding like the ark, where you gotta get all these precious things inside of it. And the ark is where they got the mercy seat on it. That's where God has been communing with the people. That's where God's spirit rests upon the mercy seat. And they're taking this thing into a flooded river. Well, don't you think don't you think that took great faith to step into something like that? Yeah, you better believe it. So the priests, they hop in there, they step in the thing, the water stops, amazing, right? And then the people start going over. Now, how do you picture the people crossing over? You think it was like a lunch line at the school where all the little kids line up behind each other and like, okay, guys, let's go. And 3 million, maybe 2 million plus people walked over in single file.
Well, you've got at least, like, what, 18 miles of
Yeah.
dry land.
So you're talking, you don't just have like a little, the size of this room, the size of this aisle. Oh, the water stopped. Does everybody come on, cross over? You're talking about miles and miles. And so you were saying about a day or so to cross over. If everybody just started going across this thing, miles, then half a day, maybe half a day, at the most a day. But I probably would have taken half a day.
And if you've ever watched, seen them where they cut a new path through the river, take a bend down the river.
Yeah.
And then they dam it up. It can take weeks and weeks and weeks for that old bed to dry out.
Oh, yeah.
And you see here, it was dry.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So I imagine it'd be difficult to cross over if you pull anything with wheels on it, right? And what are you gonna do? You're just gonna sink down into the thing, right? And I'm not sure what the bottom of, imagine, how much different of a riverbed is it over there than ours, right? It can't be that much different.
If the water's muddy, the bottom's muddy.
Yeah, you're gonna sink, yeah.
And that's another.
Yeah, we see it. There's an account in book of Judges, where that thing kind of happened. A river overflooded its banks and made everything muddy, and wheels were falling off chariots and things like that. So yeah, that not just stopping the water, but having it dry enough, solid enough to where the people could get over. Yeah, I didn't think about that. So that would be a miracle as well. That'd be at least part of it. So once everybody crossed over, the priest would then, now we're going to see this in the next chapter, but the priests get out of the ark and then the water whoosh, come rushing back in, right? Now if it was a rock slide, and, if the natural explanation is a rock slide did it, well, what's the natural explanation for the rocks getting out of the way?
The pressure.
Oops, you thought about that.
The water pressure pushed them out of the way.
Oh, okay. All right, you scientists. Huh?
Just the right time.
Oh, yeah, just the right times. Another earthquake happened and it jiggled the rocks free.
Now, Chuck, is this the same incident where the tribes piled up the rocks in the.
Okay, yeah, so we're gonna see that,
Oh,
so.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So in the next chapter, this is why they chose the 12 men. And you have two pilings of rocks. You got guys taking rocks out to place somewhere else. And then once they cross over, Joshua is gonna actually place another 12 stones as a memorial next to the river. So you're gonna have a memorial next to the river, you have a memorial where they ended up camping in a place called Gilgal. Yeah, but you're right. This is all that happens within the same time period here. Yeah. Now this crossing, so here we have Israel crossing over another body of water as they did with the Red Sea. Now this one's different than the Red Sea crossing because the Red Sea seemed to be parted while this one is the water's just stopped, right? But in this instance, in the Red Sea instance, they were running away from an enemy, right? Now in the crossing the Jordan, what are they doing? They're running towards the enemy, which I thought was interesting. Moses holds up his staff, right? And the staff seemed to be, that's what symbolized God's power. It wasn't the staff by itself, right? But he was told he holds up the staff and then the water's parted. God parted the water. Joshua didn't do anything like that. Joshua didn't have no staff or whatever.
He had the Ark of the Covenant.
But he had the ark.
Yep.
Yeah, the priest had the ark, and so there's a similarity there. It's somewhat different, right? So the ark is kind of like the staff. So
they had to do exactly what God said.
Exactly. Yeah.
If they went to the edge and not had their feet in the water, it would never dry up.
Yeah.
They had to do exactly what God said, just as Moses said to.
So they had the power of God in their toes.
Yeah. In the ark they carried. Yeah. It transferred down to their toes. All right, so any anxiety, people cross over, can you just imagine being one of the many Israelites and how you would have felt? How you would have felt seeing the water dry up, how you would have felt crossing over, maybe feeling can you imagine all the little kids?
Yeah, there goes Parker.
Picking up, touching the sand, picking up the rocks, and I don't know, I just think it would have, and then getting over it. And then seeing the water come back, that would have been amazing. Any anxiety about you remember, they're not heading over to go to the park. Oh, we gotta cross this river. Oh, we're going over to the park here and have a little fun time. They're going over to war. And so any anxiety that they would have had would have been, what? Washed away, right? Pun intended. All that would have been washed away, and Israel would have been, we're talking confidence level, +8, I mean, they have maxed out at their confidence heading into Jericho. Okay. So there's a couple lessons here. We're out of time. We'll pick up chapter 4 next time. So a couple lessons from this chapter. God makes his will known to man. Yes. God's people march in faith. These are all lessons for us today. And then obedience to God brings success. Right? Those are good things. Tim, there's your 3-point sermon. Appreciate that next time. All right, thanks everybody. We'll continue this next Sunday, Lord willing. Good morning, everybody. Having a good day so far? Do you feel like you have worshiped God so far today? I hope so. I hope you can say yes to that, because that is why we're here. We're not here for the food that's coming. We're not here just to be puffed up and things like that. There are some benefits from coming to worship, but really our number one goal is having God in mind, correct? Yes. Okay. If you like to turn over to 2 Thessalonians, we're going to be there in just a moment. We're going to read a passage from 2 Thessalonians and chapter number 1. There's a story about a young soldier. He was supposed to be brought before his king because of his subordination, and he had been breaking some military laws and things like that, and the justice of the king demanded his death. And so his mother, the soldier's mother, came before the king and to plead for her son's life. And she says, please, my king, she gets down on her knees, please, my king, have mercy on my son. And he looks at her and says, I'm sorry, but what has he done to deserve mercy? And she says, nothing, my king. For if he deserved it, it wouldn't be called mercy. And upon hearing those words, through all of her tears, the king said that he promised to show her son mercy. Now, the thought of being judged by God, what is that? You are going to be judged by God one day. What kind of feelings does that bring up inside of you? Are they good? Are they bad? A little scary? A little iffy? Don't know if you want to do that? Would you do it right now? Would you do it today? It's not the most comfortable thought for people, being judged by God, but I think we should say that it should not be as troubling as it is for a lot of folks, especially people who call themselves Christians, right? Because among the many things that we have to be thankful for is that our loving Savior is also a merciful judge. And what we're going to do this morning is look at a certain passage that probably is not a lot of folks' first passage to go to when you're learning about Jesus being a merciful judge. But you know what? That's what we're going to do today. So over in 2 Thessalonians, chapter number 1, we're going to start in verse 3 and read through verse 10, okay? 2 Thessalonians, chapter 1, verse 3. Here's what it says. We are bound to thank God always for you, brethren, as it is fitting, because your faith grows exceedingly, and the love of every one of you abounds toward each other, so that we ourselves boast of you among the churches of God for your patience and faith. Now watch this. What did they have patience and faith in? Are you reading it with me? In all your persecutions and tribulations that you endure. All right, now keep that in your mind. Verse 5, which is manifest evidence of the righteous judgment of God, that you may be counted worthy of the kingdom of God, for which you also suffer. Since it is a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who trouble you, and to give you who are troubled rest with us, when the Lord Jesus, it's the first time he's mentioned in this passage, is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels. Verse 8, in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who do not know God and on those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. These shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power, when he comes in that day to be glorified in his saints and to be admired among all those who believe, because our testimony among you was believed. Now, where do you get a merciful judge out of that, you think? You know, skeptics spit on the idea of a merciful judge because of passages like this. And they'll point out the words fire and vengeance and punishment and destruction. And they'll try to tell you that's really all the God that you worship, that's all he's about. And even some religious people among us, even in church, they have stooped to compromise because of the severity that this passage so obviously possesses, especially with words like everlasting destruction. And we've got folks out there teaching, well, hell's not even really real. There's no such thing as everlasting destruction. You get destroyed for a little tiny bit. You get purged from your sins, and then you go to heaven, or we're all going to heaven anyways. Hell's only for bad angels and all kind of weird stuff like that. Because this passage, verses 7, 8, and 9, not the happiest of passages, right? Now, we do see a judge here, right? You do see a judge, but it's the one that a lot of people don't like. It's the mean judge, the hateful judge. So where is the merciful judge, though? Because that's what we're trying to find out. Where's the mercy in here? Well, you're not going to see one if you only look at 7, 8, and 9 alone. Actually, if you look at 7, that's where you're going to find mercy. Verse 6 and 7, that's where mercy is found, and it's being given to the faithful, right? It's being given to those who are going to finally receive rest from that persecution and the tribulations that they've been having to endure for the sake of God. Verse 4 and 5. You see, when you focus on one part of the judgment, this is what a lot of folks do. You focus on one part of the judgment, you get one side of the judge, right? Better to view God from beginning to end of judgment, if we could put it like that. You need to view God not just judging the good, or not just judging the evil, but God judges everybody, judges us all. Just because a judge, now let's say any judge that you might know, a judge out there, maybe a judge in town here or something, or somewhere else. Just because a judge hands down a very harsh sentence to someone who deserves the harsh sentence, that does not mean he's an automatically unmerciful judge, does it? If our judges, the judges in our district or county or whatever it is, if they were always letting the truly guilty now, they're always just letting them go free, not even probation, just let them go free, despite the guilty's refusal to correct their crimes, correct their behavior, to pay their dues, or to make things right per the judge's order, then you're going to have outrage, right? The outrage will be, that he needs to be removed from the bench, and he's a corrupt judge, he's unfair, he's unjust, he's dishonest. If he doesn't do his job like he should. But the same people who would be outraged at that, some of them will scramble and try to teach that God will do what they don't want the judge doing. Right? He's just going to let everybody go to heaven. Don't care what they do, don't care what they believe, no matter how bad they hate God. Right? People want perfection from imperfect beings. That's us. Like somehow we just, even with in another situation, if people aren't perfect, it upsets us, and they need to be doing right. But they also want imperfect justice from the only perfect being that exists, and it just doesn't make sense. Here's a more pacifist side of things. Reading an article about a listener of a podcast, I think, or something, was telling this particular author this article about a Christian professor. Now, when I say Christian professor, we're going to use those two terms very, very loosely. But a Christian professor in some religious institution in this country was saying that if any Christian finds themselves sitting on a jury, and have y'all ever been a juror? You've been selected, but are called in? Have you ever been selected to be on? Okay. So this Christian professor now was teaching his students that if Christians ever found themselves sitting on a jury, and there was no doubt that the defendant was guilty, then the Christian should always, in every single case, give a not guilty verdict. Why? He says, because that is the merciful thing to do. That's what Jesus would do. So basically, just throw any kind of justice out the window, right? That is what is being taught in our Christian institutions. It's not being taught where I teach, by the way, but in a lot of them, that's what's going on. So then the author goes on to say, I don't know, there's something wrong with that, right? And he goes on to list some things like, why should fathers ever discipline their children, right? Even when you have the command in Ephesians 6 and verse 4. Why should teachers ever give failing grades to failing students? The merciful thing to do would just be to pass them anyways, right? Why should employers ever fire terrible, lazy employees? Because the merciful thing to do would be to keep them on the payroll and let them run your business into the ground. And despite 2 Thessalonians 3:10 saying, if a man should not work, neither shall he. No, the merciful thing to do is just keep them on the payroll. Why should the church ever practice corrective or even instructive discipline, right? The merciful thing to do was just show people love and let them live in their so obvious sins and let them run the church into the ground as well. Mercy has its place alongside justice, right? But one cannot be shown at the expense of the other. Are you with me on that? Okay? God will never do that. And so neither should his people. Now, concerning the judgment seen in 2 Thessalonians 1, we might ask this in 7, 8, 9, the bad passages. We might ask this, how much time do you think was offered to these people? Well, let's say, how much mercy, how much patience was offered to those people who were persecuting the church? And we've ever thought about that? How much time, how much mercy was shown to those who didn't know God? How much patience and mercy was given to those who refused to obey the gospel? You know, we don't have this picture of where Jesus all of a sudden they denounce God, or all of a sudden they're persecuting the church, and then boom, we got a scene of Jesus just coming down and descending and vaporizing these people into ashes. That's not what we get. This judgment, what you read about, is at the end of all things. And so these folks would have had much of their entire lives to stop their evil ways, to repent of their sins, to make better life decisions, to give Christ their life, to glorify God, right? The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in mercy. Psalm 103 and verse 8. Paul writes that God is rich in mercy. He doesn't say he's rich in wrath, rich in anger, right? And we know that God's not willing that any should perish, even those who hate him, even those who curse him, even those who refuse him, and even those who persecute his people. God doesn't want them to perish. 2 Peter 3 and verse 9. And so for us, for anybody to say to you, to try to dumb down your faith or try to get you away from your grounded faith, to say that God never showed mercy to the soul who winds up in hell is really just at best being ignorant of what the Bible actually teaches, and at worst, just flat out lying, right? Do you agree with me on that? If you're listening, you probably agree. So what we find happening to the lost in 2 Thessalonians 1 is not God's ideal will. Right? Where's the verse that says, man, I, the Lord, am speaking, and I hope that all people end up in hell. Where's that verse? Now, you might remember a few weeks ago, this is some time ago, where we talked about God's heart. And we see this verse right in the middle of a very poetic book. So in Lamentations chapter 3 and verse 33, right? And what we find there is a glimpse of God's mercy. It says, for he does not afflict willingly, right? Or he does not afflict from his heart. It is not God's ideal will for people to perish in hell. And I would even say it's not even God's ideal will, listen to me closely, that people suffer consequences because of their sins. He doesn't want that. God doesn't have this lightning bolt of judgment in his hand, ready to cast down at a moment's notice. That's some other people's religion. That's another kind of false God, right? That's some people's God that don't even exist. It's in the cartoons. In fact, if we could ever picture God having anything in his hand, ready to give out, it would be mercy. It'd be love and mercy. He is ready to pardon, Nehemiah 9. He is gracious and merciful, Joel chapter number 2. And in the same Jesus Christ who is going to be revealed from heaven in flaming fire, taking vengeance, is the same Jesus Christ who said that he was gentle and lowly in heart, and that if we come to him, we can find rest for our souls, if that's what we want. Same Jesus Christ. That's not different. That's Matthew 11:29. Do we expect God to show mercy to people? Do you expect God to show mercy no matter what? Do you expect God to show mercy to those people who refuse to believe in Him, who've had their whole life to believe in Him? You expect God to show mercy to people who just absolutely put their foot down and refuse to listen to what God has to say, to refuse to obey Him, refuse to thank Him for all the blessings that they get? And God should just show mercy. No, we should not expect Him to do that. Psalm 103, verse 11 says, "For as the heavens are high above the earth, so great is His mercy toward those who fear Him." So what about those who don't fear Him? How great should His mercy be? What would you say? King Saul once enjoyed the mercy of God. Well, because of his sinful actions in life, him turning away from God, God took the mercy away from him. 2 Samuel chapter 7. We know many times, Hosea 1 and verse 6 says that God removed His mercy from Israel. How often did He do that? A lot. Listen to what the psalmist says in Psalm 143, 11 and 12. He says, "Revive me, O Lord, for your name's sake." Now listen, he says, "For your righteousness' sake, bring my soul out of trouble." God, get me out of this trouble. Well, what was his trouble? Verse 12 says, now listen to what he says, "In your mercy, cut off my enemies." In your mercy, show judgment. That's what he's saying. In your mercy, cut off my enemies. In your mercy, destroy all those who afflict my soul, for I am your servant. Was it wrong for the psalmist to pray that prayer? But that's exactly the scenario we see playing out in 2 Thessalonians 1, our passage for today. God's servants being relieved, being rescued, being delivered from their enemies. Mercy and judgment. We can take, that's Old Testament. We take it over to the New Testament in Luke chapter number 16, 24 and 25, where the rich man, what does he do? When he realizes that he is where he is and Lazarus is where Lazarus is, and he says, basically, he asked Father Abraham to have mercy on him, doesn't he? And what does Abraham say? Not going to happen. Abraham refuses mercy. Now, regardless of whether you think it's a parable, some people say, "Oh, that doesn't really show a real picture. It's a parable." It doesn't matter whether it's a parable or not. Who's going to say that Abraham was wrong in refusing mercy to him? Who's going to say that? Not me. In fact, I think it would be right to say that Abraham could not show mercy to that rich man even if he wanted to, because that window had closed. And it wasn't because God or Christ is an unrighteous, unmerciful judge. It's because of that man's decisions that he made in his life, contrary to God's will. I think it helps with this subject, which is not always an easy subject to tackle. I think it helps tremendously to have a proper view of the gospel. When you read the phrase, "obey the gospel," which I think some people have never even heard that. Believe in Jesus, yes. But obey the gospel? That's like, what? Is that even in the Bible? When you see the word obey there, 2 Thessalonians 1 and verse 8, the definition for that Greek word means to hear under. To hear under, as a subordinate. Now, used in the religious sense, it means to receive the divine word by hearing and turn that into action, thereby obeying. All right? Now, when you use it let's use it in like a courtroom setting, a judicial setting, it means, that same word means strict obedience or to an order or law. That's what it means. Now, do you think that understanding the word obey helps us to understand the command to obey the gospel? Or have I lost you completely? Let me explain. So if I view the gospel of Jesus Christ as nothing more than this undeserved gift that benefits me so much, which it is an undeserved gift, and it does benefit the person so very much. But I'm talking about just if I only view the gospel in that way, you know what that's going to lead to? That's going to lead to me setting my life's path and setting my beliefs based upon knowledge of only one side of God. Oh, it's so he gave it to me. I didn't even deserve it, and it gives me all these blessings. And oh man, life is just a bed of roses. And that's the gospel. And all that's going to do is lead me to having a severe misunderstanding of judgment, because I mean, if I'm going to be a Christian, I'm going to be reading the Bible, and I'm going to come across some passages like 2 Thessalonians 1. I'm like, what is this? This cannot be. It must mean something else than what it's actually saying. However, if I add to that my view of the gospel of Christ as an order from a commander-in-chief, or as if I view the gospel as a law from a divine lawgiver, which it absolutely is that, Galatians 6, 1 Corinthians 9, James 1, then I'm going to have, along with those, so you know, not just one or the other, I take them both, I'm going to have a much better understanding of the severity of God, which is a real thing. I'm going to have a much better understanding of the severity of God as a just, as a fair, as a righteous, as a merciful judge. Now, folks would want to tell you that 100% mercy and 100% judgment, they can't go together. But it's not really an odd pair. They don't contradict one another. It's actually been seen before in the Bible. We can go quickly to the book of Exodus and the 10 plagues in chapters 7 through 12. Now, you might recall reading through the 10 plagues and some of the plagues. Now, and you might think, oh, well, the first 9 plagues, they did not affect Israel. They only affected Egypt and Pharaoh's people. They didn't affect the Israelites, right? And so you could read in chapter 7 where it was the Egyptians, when the water was turned to blood, the Egyptians were the one digging around the river to try to get the fresh water out so they could have something to drink. There's no mention of Israelites having to do that. When the livestock were being stricken, there was a difference made between the livestock of Egypt and the livestock of Israel. It's chapter 9, verse 4. The text says, only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, there was no hail when the hail started falling. It's chapter 9. And then the 9th plague, you might remember, was darkness over all the land. Oh, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings, and no one else did. Chapter 10. But when you get to the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, that's different. The firstborn of man and the firstborn of all their animals, they were to die. And the only way that this plague was not going to affect a household was if there was blood over the doorpost, right? Remember that? And so if any household, no matter who you are, if any household did not have the blood on there, they were not going to be passed over and they were going to suffer. And so this command right there to ensure the physical salvation of the firstborn, that was a showing, that was going to affect everybody. That was a showing of God's mercy right in the middle of a severe judgment, was it not? And the same applies today, right? Everybody deserves death. Every sinner deserves death. But God allows every sinner to be covered by the blood of Jesus Christ. Revelation 1 and verse number 5. And so if anybody finds themselves on the flaming fire side of the Lord come judgment day, it will not be because the Lord failed to show them mercy. Peter wrote that the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and to reserve the unjust under punishment in the day of judgment. 2 Peter 2 and verse 9. And in that deliverance is mercy. And in the future, that is going to play out as our passage in 2 Thessalonians 1 teaches. Jesus would say, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. For they shall obtain mercy. Matthew 5 and verse 7. And I think we see that in our passage today as well. So let's close with this. He first sent his son into the world, not to condemn the world, not to judge the world, but to save it, right? You think, is that a true statement? Well, that's John 12 and verse 47. You know why he said it like that? Because judgment's coming later. Not that it wasn't going to take place, but that's just coming later. He came to teach and to save the lost. Now, when Christ returns, the judgment that is going to take place, it's going to take place for those who refuse to believe in him and refuse to obey him. But at the same time, God's mercy, Christ's mercy, is going to be on full display for all those who love him. And so, which side are you going to be on that day? What about right now? Which side are you on? You're on the side who's going to face swift, severe judgment and punishment, even though you might call yourself a Christian? Or are you going to be on the side who's going to love every moment of that day because all you're going to see is mercy? Don't you think it's important to figure that out? Like right now? You know it is. You know it is. So the invitation is open. If you need to respond to it, you might need to obey the gospel today. I hope you make that good choice. At least study it out with us so you can make sure you're 100% going to see Christ's mercy. Maybe you are a Christian here and been living in sin. You know, man, there's so many things that you shouldn't be doing and so many things you should be. How many times you got to hear me say that before you actually make a decision? I mean, how hard is it? Like, who's holding you back? How many friends you got that wouldn't like the changes that you make? Or how many family members is it? Like, what is it? Whatever it is, you know nothing is more important than God and going to heaven. Everybody's going somewhere one day. Your body might go on the ground, but you are going to live on. And how much time do you think, how much patience, how much mercy is God going to have to show you in your life right now to get you to see that? Let's grab our songbooks, stand and sing.